May 20, 1940, 1847 hours, coastal bluffs overlooking the English Channel near Abbeville, France. General Oberst Heinz Wilhelm Guderian stepped out of his command half-track and raised his field glasses toward the gray waters stretching to the horizon. Behind him, the rumble of Panzer IV engines mixed with the metallic clanking of tank tracks on cobblestone, as 19th Panzer Corps continued their relentless advance. The smell of diesel exhaust, hot steel, and coastal salt air filled his nostrils. According to the original Case Yellow plan, German forces were supposed to reach this position in 6 weeks. Guderian's tanks had covered 240 miles of French territory in exactly 10 days. The mathematical impossibility of what his armored spearhead had just accomplished would rewrite military doctrine forever. But at this moment, watching Royal Navy destroyers frantically evacuating British troops from Dunkirk's distant beaches, Guderian understood he was witnessing something far more profound than tactical success. He was watching the death of positional warfare and the birth of a new kind of conflict that moved faster than human minds could process. The story begins 3 years earlier, in the sterile conference rooms of the German General Staff, where Guderian's theories about armored warfare were being systematically dismantled by officers who had learned their trade in the trenches of World War I. According to Wehrmacht archives from 1937, the prevailing doctrine called for tanks to support infantry advances at walking speed, never penetrating deeper than artillery could reach to provide support. General Ludwig Beck, Chief of the General Staff, had personally rejected Guderian's proposals for independent armored formations, declaring them operationally unsound and logistically impossible. The official position, documented in OKH Planning Directive 847, stated that mechanized units should advance no faster than 6 miles per day to maintain supply lines and coordinate with traditional infantry divisions. Guderian's concept of blitzkrieg, literally lightning war, called for armored spearheads to penetrate enemy lines at speeds exceeding 40 miles per day, cutting communications and creating pockets of resistance that could be eliminated later. The German High Command considered this mathematical impossibility. Supply vehicles could not keep pace with such advances. Radio communications had limited range. Most importantly, no army in history had ever attempted to coordinate operations across such vast distances at such speed. Heinz Wilhelm Guderian had been born in 1888 in Kulm, Prussia, the son of a Prussian officer who expected his children to serve the fatherland with distinction. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Guderian had witnessed the stagnation of trench warfare firsthand as a signals officer during World War I, watching thousands of men die for gains measured in yards rather than miles. He spent the interwar years studying the works of British military theorists like B.H. Littlehart and J.F.C. Fuller, who advocated for mechanized warfare, while simultaneously observing Soviet tank exercises and analyzing reports of Republican forces using concentrated armor during the Spanish Civil War. By 1935, Guderian commanded Germany's 1st Panzer Division, but his requests for expanded armored formations were consistently denied by superiors, who viewed tanks as expensive toys that would break down before reaching the battlefield. Wehrmacht maintenance reports from 1938 showed that German tanks required major repairs every 150 miles on average, leading General Franz Halder to conclude that armored spearheads would be stranded without supply support within days of any offensive. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. A single panzer division consumed 300 tons of fuel daily, yet German supply columns could transport only 200 tons per day across the primitive road networks of Eastern Europe. The problem that would change everything emerged during the planning for Case Yellow, Germany's offensive against France and the Low Countries. Traditional German doctrine called for a repeat of the Schlieffen Plan, with the main attack coming through Belgium to avoid France's heavily fortified Maginot Line. General Erich von Manstein proposed an alternative, a concentrated armored thrust through the Ardennes forest, considered impassable by French planners, followed by a race to the Channel coast that would cut Allied forces in two. The plan required armored divisions to cover 200 miles of enemy territory in less than 2 weeks, a pace that exceeded every historical precedent for mechanized warfare. French intelligence estimates, captured after the fall of Paris, showed that Marshal Maurice Gamelin expected German forces to require at least 40 days to reach the Channel, providing ample time for British reinforcements to arrive and establish defensive positions. General Heinz Guderian found himself commanding 99th Panzer Corps with orders to prove that armored warfare could move faster than enemy commanders could react. The weight of German military doctrine rested on his shoulders, along with the lives of 140 men under his command, and the fate of Nazi Germany's entire Western offensive. The morning of May 10, 1940, revealed the first cracks in conventional wisdom about mechanized warfare. Guderian's lead elements, spearheaded by the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions, crossed the Luxembourg border at 05:35 hours and immediately encountered something unexpected. Roads designed for civilian traffic, not military operations, that nonetheless provided faster transportation than cross-country movement through mud and forest. German logistics officers had calculated fuel consumption based on off-road driving, which consumed twice as much diesel as highway travel. Within 6 hours, advance elements were reporting fuel reserves 40% higher than projected, allowing commanders to maintain speed without waiting for supply columns. French defensive positions, designed around the assumption that attackers would advance slowly with artillery support, proved inadequate against tanks moving at 25 miles per hour without stopping to establish fire bases. Radio intercepts from French units showed confusion about German positions, with reports placing the same panzer divisions simultaneously in locations more than 50 miles apart. The speed of advance had exceeded the ability of traditional command structures to track enemy movements. By May 13th, Guderian's tanks reached the Meuse River near Sedan, 72 hours ahead of the most optimistic German projections. French fortifications along the river had been designed to withstand prolonged siege, not sudden assault, by mechanized forces that appeared without warning. The crossing at Sedan involved 2 400 vehicles moving across pontoon bridges under constant artillery fire. Yet German engineers managed to maintain traffic flow rates exceeding 1 vehicle per minute for 14 consecutive hours. Luftwaffe archives show that Stuka dive bombers provided close air support with response times under 12 minutes, a coordination previously considered impossible given communication limitations. French General Charles Hunziker, commanding the Second Army defending the Sedan sector, reported to General Gamelin that German forces were advancing with supernatural speed, requesting immediate reinforcement of positions that were already being overrun as his message reached headquarters. The collapse of French resistance along the Meuse demonstrated something profound about modern warfare. Defensive positions designed around static assumptions became death traps when attacked by forces moving faster than defenders could reposition. If you want to discover how a Prussian general's rejected theories changed warfare forever and split the British Expeditionary Force from French defenders in 10 days, please leave your like on this video. This helps YouTube show these forgotten stories to more people. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We rescue stories like this from dusty archives every day. The breakthrough at Sedan unleashed something unprecedented in military history. An armored advance that moved faster than news of its own progress. German tanks crossed the Meuse on May 13th, but French command posts 100 miles away were still receiving reports of German forces massing east of the river. On May 15th, Guderian's tactical innovation involved abandoning traditional communication protocols in favor of constant forward movement, with radio updates transmitted only when tanks stopped for fuel or ammunition. This created what military historians would later term information asymmetry, where German commanders knew their own positions precisely, while enemy forces operated on intelligence that was 48 to 72 hours out of date. Wehrmacht communications logs show that Guderian's headquarters received position reports from advance elements every 4 hours. While intercepted, French radio traffic revealed that Allied commanders were making strategic decisions based on German positions that were accurate 3 days earlier. The mathematical advantage was devastating. French forces were consistently reinforcing areas that German tanks had already passed through, while actual German positions remained undefended. The human cost of this speed became apparent in the personal accounts of French soldiers caught in the German advance. Private Jean-Baptiste Morel of the 3rd Infantry Division wrote in a letter home, recovered from German archives in 1947, "The tanks come from nowhere and go to nowhere. We dig positions to defend against an attack that happened yesterday in a place we left this morning. The officers shout orders to retreat to villages that the radio says are already burning." French medical reports from May 16th show that 70% of casualties in the Sedan sector were not caused by direct combat, but by units attempting to retreat faster than their equipment could move, leading to abandoned artillery, overturned vehicles, and soldiers separated from their formations. The psychological impact was equally profound. Interrogation reports of French prisoners reveal that many soldiers surrendered not because they were defeated in combat, but because they could not understand where German forces were located or where they should be fighting. German supply innovations proved equally revolutionary. Traditional military doctrine required supply lines to be established and secured before advancing forces could move beyond artillery range of their bases. Guderian implemented fuel-forward logistics, where tanker trucks moved with combat units and established fuel points at captured enemy installations. By May 17th, German tanks were refueling at French fuel depots, captured intact because defending forces had retreated faster than they could implement destruction orders. Wehrmacht quartermaster reports show that 99th Panzer Corps consumed 60% less fuel than projected during the first week of operations, not because engines were more efficient, but because captured French fuel supplemented German supplies. This logistical breakthrough eliminated the main argument against deep armored penetration. Supply lines became self-sustaining through captured enemy resources. French logistics officers had never calculated how quickly their own supply infrastructure could be turned against them by an enemy moving faster than demolition crews. The technical superiority that made this speed possible centered around German innovations in radio communication and mechanical reliability. While French tanks required maintenance stops every 50 miles and radio contact with command posts every 2 hours, German Panzer III and IV tanks had been engineered for sustained operation with maintenance intervals of 150 miles and radio systems capable of maintaining contact over 30-mile ranges even while moving at full speed. These technical advantages, seemingly minor in isolation, became decisive when multiplied across hundreds of vehicles moving continuously for 10 days. German tank crews slept in 4-hour shifts while their vehicles continued moving, with drivers rotated every 6 hours to maintain alertness. French armor doctrine required overnight stops for maintenance and crew rest, reducing effective operational time by 40% compared to German units. Over the course of a 10-day operation, these incremental advantages accumulated into German forces moving twice as far as French planners considered mechanically possible. The moment when conventional wisdom collapsed entirely came on May 19th, when Guderian's advance elements reached Abbeville and achieved what German planners had considered the ultimate objective, cutting British and French forces in northern France off from their supply bases in the south. The mathematical precision was stunning. German forces had covered 240 miles in 9 days, averaging 26. 7 miles per day through enemy territory while maintaining combat effectiveness and mechanical reliability. French General Maxime Weygand, who replaced Gamelin as Supreme Commander on May 19th, received intelligence reports showing German tanks in Abbeville at the exact moment he was approving defensive plans based on German positions near Sedan. The collapse of temporal awareness in military planning meant that Allied forces were fighting a war that was always several days behind reality. Radio transcripts from the British Expeditionary Force show commanders requesting reinforcement of positions that German forces had bypassed 72 hours earlier, while German tanks were already establishing defensive positions to prevent exactly the kind of counterattacks that British forces were still planning. How many of you have a grandfather, a father, an uncle who served and never talked about what it was like to fight an enemy who moved faster than information could travel? These stories are disappearing. Leave a comment now saying just, "Information travels slow." When you comment, you're not just honoring military history. You're preserving the lessons about how technology changes warfare in ways that planners never predict. Let's create a living memorial here in the comments. The psychological impact on German forces proved as significant as the tactical results. Tank crews who had been trained to expect fierce resistance and heavy casualties found themselves advancing through countryside, where French forces retreated faster than German units could pursue them. Obergefreiter Karl Fuchs of the 7th Panzer Division wrote to his wife on May 20th, "We have driven for 9 days and fired our guns for perhaps 9 minutes total. The enemy runs from us before we can even see them. The officers keep checking maps because they cannot believe we have come so far so quickly." German military psychiatrists reported that tank crews were experiencing advanced syndrome, a form of disorientation caused by succeeding beyond their psychological preparation for combat. Many German soldiers had expected to die breaking through French defensive lines. Instead, they found themselves racing across open countryside with minimal resistance. This psychological unpreparedness for rapid success would later contribute to German overconfidence in planning for the invasion of the Soviet Union, where similar speed would encounter far different results. The technical lessons learned during the 10-day dash to the Channel revolutionized military thinking about mechanized warfare. German engineers discovered that tanks could operate continuously for 200+ hours if maintenance was performed, while vehicles remained in motion, with repair crews riding in accompanying half-racks and conducting mechanical work during brief fuel stops. Traditional doctrine required tanks to return to fixed maintenance facilities every 48 hours, a requirement that German forces ignored out of tactical necessity and found to be unnecessary under combat conditions. Radio communication proved far more reliable over long distances than peacetime exercises had suggested, primarily because combat operations provided constant opportunities to relay messages through advancing units, creating ad hoc communication networks that extended far beyond the range of individual radio sets. Most importantly, the German advance demonstrated that enemy logistics could be turned into friendly resources if captured quickly enough, eliminating the supply constraints that had historically limited the depth of armored penetration. The view from the other side revealed the collapse of military planning when confronted with unprecedented speed. French intelligence reports from May 20th show that General Weygand's staff was attempting to coordinate a counterattack using maps that showed German positions as of May 16th, while actual German forces had advanced 60 miles beyond those positions. British General Lord Gort, commanding the British Expeditionary Force, received orders from London to establish defensive positions south of Arras at the exact moment when German tanks were cutting his supply lines 40 miles south of that location. The mathematical impossibility of coordinating military operations when information moved slower than enemy forces created a cascade of failures throughout Allied command structures. Radio intercepts show French commanders issuing orders to units that no longer existed, while requesting reinforcement of positions that had been abandoned days earlier. The German success at reaching the Channel ahead of all predictions had immediate strategic consequences that rippled far beyond the tactical situation in France. Winston Churchill, who had become Prime Minister on May 10th as German forces began their offensive, received reports on May 20th that the British Expeditionary Force was completely cut off from French forces and faced potential annihilation. The speed of German advance had eliminated British options for strategic withdrawal while maintaining combat effectiveness, forcing the improvisation of Operation Dynamo, the evacuation from Dunkirk that would define British memory of early World War II. German naval archives show that Kriegsmarine commanders received no advance notice that army forces would reach the Channel so quickly, leaving German naval forces unprepared to prevent British evacuation operations. The success of German land forces moved faster than German planning could coordinate joint operations, a limitation that would prove costly as British forces escaped to fight again. The technical achievement represented by Guderian's advance to the Channel established new baseline expectations for mechanized warfare that influenced military planning for the remainder of World War II and beyond. Soviet observers, who had dismissed German armored doctrine as capitalist adventurism prior to 1940, immediately began restructuring Red Army mechanized units to emphasize speed and deep penetration over traditional combined arms coordination. American military attachés in London filed reports describing German tank operations as a new form of warfare that makes previous military experience obsolete, leading to accelerated development of American armored doctrine and the formation of independent tank battalions. The Japanese Army, despite being primarily engaged in infantry operations in China, restructured their mechanized units based on German innovations in radio communication and fuel-forward logistics. The mathematical precision of German success created a template that every military force attempted to replicate, often without understanding the technical innovations that made such speed possible. Guderian's moment of triumph on the Channel Bluffs carried within it the seeds of future German strategic disasters. The success of rapid armored advance led German planners to assume that similar tactics would prove equally effective against Soviet forces in 1941, despite vast differences in geography, infrastructure, and enemy capabilities. Heinrich Himmler's personal notes, captured after the war, show that Nazi leadership interpreted the success in France as validation of German racial superiority rather than tactical innovation, leading to dangerous overconfidence in subsequent operations. German logistics officers began planning future operations based on the assumption that enemy supplies would always supplement German resources, an assumption that proved catastrophically wrong in the vast distances of the Soviet Union, where captured supplies were insufficient to sustain advancing forces. The very speed that made German success possible in France became a liability in subsequent campaigns where enemy forces could trade space for time over distances that exceeded German logistical capabilities. The technical revolution that Guderian demonstrated to the world on May 20, 1940, fundamentally altered the relationship between technology and strategy in modern warfare. His success proved that mechanical innovation could eliminate traditional constraints of time and space that had defined military operations since ancient times. The ability to move information, firepower, and supplies faster than enemy forces could react created advantages that multiplied across time, ultimately proving more decisive than numerical superiority or defensive fortification. Yet the same innovations that enabled unprecedented tactical success also created strategic vulnerabilities, as forces moving faster than their supporting infrastructure could sustain themselves became dependent on enemy resources and favorable terrain conditions that might not exist in future conflicts. The mathematics of modern mechanized warfare, first demonstrated during the dash to the Channel, established principles that continue to influence military planning 8 decades later. Heinz Wilhelm Guderian survived the war, despite falling out of favor with Hitler following disagreements about strategy on the Eastern Front. After being captured by American forces in 1945, he spent 2 years in Allied detention before being released without trial, as his role had been purely military rather than political. He returned to his family home in Goslar, West Germany, where he spent his remaining years writing memoirs and consulting with NATO planners about Soviet armored tactics. His book Panzer Leader, published in 1952, became required reading at military academies worldwide and established the intellectual framework for Cold War armored doctrine. Guderian died peacefully in 1954 at age 65, having lived to see his tactical innovations adopted by both former enemies and allies as standard doctrine for mechanized warfare. His grave in Goslar bears the simple inscription, Heinz Guderian, Panzer General, without mention of the tactical revolution he initiated on a French hillside overlooking the English Channel. The tanks that carried Guderian's forces to their historic triumph met varied fates in the years that followed. Most of the Panzer III and Panzer IV vehicles that crossed the Meuse at Sedan were destroyed during subsequent campaigns in North Africa and the Soviet Union, victims of the same rapid advance doctrine that had made them famous in France. Several examples survive today in military museums, including Panzer IV Ausf. D number 621, which reached Abbeville on May 20th, 1940, and is now displayed at the German Tank Museum in Munster. The Sedan battlefield, where Guderian's forces achieved their crucial breakthrough, has been preserved as a memorial park where visitors can walk the route that German engineers used to cross the Meuse River under fire. The pontoon bridge site is marked with plaques in French, German, and English, acknowledging the tactical significance of what occurred there without celebrating the political context that made it necessary. The legacy of Guderian's dash to the Channel extends far beyond military history, into fundamental questions about how technological innovation disrupts established systems of human organization. His success demonstrated that institutional wisdom, accumulated over centuries of warfare, could become not just obsolete, but actively dangerous when confronted with technologies that change the basic parameters of time and space within which human decision-making operates. The lesson applies beyond military affairs to any situation where established institutions must adapt to technological change that moves faster than traditional planning cycles can accommodate. Modern military forces, business organizations, and political systems continue to grapple with versions of the same challenge that French commanders faced in May 1940: how to make decisions and coordinate responses when the pace of change exceeds the speed of institutional adaptation. The story of Guderian's tanks racing to the Channel ahead of all predictions ultimately illustrates the profound disconnect between human psychology and technological possibility. French military leaders, British politicians, and German planners all shared the same fundamental assumption that military operations would unfold according to historical precedent, at speeds that allowed for deliberate decision-making and coordinated response. The reality of mechanized warfare proved that technology could compress time and space in ways that rendered traditional planning obsolete, creating situations where success or failure was determined not by superior numbers or better positions, but by the ability to process information and adapt decisions faster than established institutions were designed to operate. This lesson, first demonstrated on the roads of France in May 1940, remains relevant in any era where technological change moves faster than human institutions can adapt. If this story moved you the same way it moved us, do us a favor. Leave your like on this video. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every day. Stories about generals who rewrote military doctrine, tank crews who moved faster than news of their own advance, engineers who proved that impossible was just another word for untested. Real people, real innovation. Leave a comment now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Canada, Australia. Our community extends around the world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location, tell us if anyone in your family served, just tell us you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that Heinz Guderian's tactical revolution doesn't disappear into silence. These innovations deserve to be remembered, and you're helping to make that possible.